The wedding dress felt heavier than chains. As the music echoed through the grand cathedral, Emma Carter stood frozen at the entrance, fighting the tears threatening to ruin her makeup. Everyone believed she was the luckiest woman in the city. Only she knew she was walking toward a prison. At the end of the aisle stood Alexander Blackwood, America's youngest billionaire. He was handsome, powerful, feared, and completely blind. Emma had never met him before today, yet in less than 5 minutes, he would become her husband. What she didn't know was that Alexander was hiding a secret so unbelievable. It would destroy everything she thought she knew about love, wealth, and sacrifice. 3 hours earlier, rain poured relentlessly over the old hospital. Inside room 417, the faint beep of a heart monitor echoed through the silence. Emma sat beside her father's bed, gently holding his trembling hand. The room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Her father, David Carter, once a respected architect, now looked decades older than his 60 years. Cancer had taken nearly everything. His strength, his savings, his future. Only his smile remained. "You didn't sleep again," he whispered. Emma forced a smile. "I'll sleep after you're home." He chuckled weakly. "You've been saying that for months." She looked away. The truth hurt too much. Their house had already been mortgaged. Her mother's jewelry was gone. Every paycheck disappeared before it even reached her bank account. Yet the hospital bills kept growing. A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Wilson entered with 2 nurses. His expression told Emma everything before he even spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "The treatment we've discussed needs to begin this week." Emma nodded. "I know." The insurance company denied the new medication again. Silence. "There is another option." Emma immediately stood. "What option?" The doctor hesitated. "It's expensive." "How expensive?" He looked at the paperwork. "Approximately $3 million. Emma laughed. Not because it was funny, because her mind refused to accept a number that impossible. $3 million. They couldn't even afford next month's rent. David squeezed her hand. "It's enough." Emma turned toward him. "No. Emma. No." She wiped away her tears before anyone could notice. "I promised Mom I'd take care of you." "You already have." "I haven't finished." Before anyone could speak again, Emma's phone vibrated. Unknown number. Normally she ignored them. Something made her answer. "Miss Carter?" "Yes." "This is Mr. Harrison from Blackwood Holdings." She frowned. "I think you have the wrong person." "I assure you I do not. I have an offer that could save your father's life." Emma's heart stopped. "What?" "We'll send a car." The call ended. No explanation. No details. Only silence. Emma stared at the dark phone screen. How could strangers know about her father? More importantly, what did they want in return? Outside the hospital, a black limousine was already waiting. The limousine looked impossibly expensive. Its polished exterior reflected the gray sky like black glass. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. "Miss Carter." His tone wasn't a question. He already knew exactly who she was. Emma hesitated. Every instinct told her to run. But then she remembered her father's pale face. $3 million. She slowly climbed inside. The doors closed with a soft click. The city disappeared behind tinted windows. No music. No conversation. Only silence. 40 minutes later, the limousine stopped before a mansion that looked more like a palace. Stone pillars. Perfect gardens. A fountain taller than most houses. Emma stepped out, suddenly aware of how cheap her clothes looked. A silver-haired man greeted her. "My name is Harrison." His suit probably cost more than her annual salary. "Please." He gestured toward the entrance. "This way." Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors. Crystal chandeliers. Original paintings. It felt less like a home and more like a museum. Harrison led her into a private study. One man sat behind a massive wooden desk. He was in his late 60s. Sharp eyes. Perfect posture. An air of quiet authority. "Emma Carter." He smiled politely. "I'm Edward Blackwood." The name hit her immediately. Founder of Blackwood Holdings. One of the richest men in the country. She swallowed. "I don't understand why I'm here." Edward folded his hands. "I'll be direct. I appreciate that. My grandson needs a wife." Emma blinked. "I'm sorry. You heard correctly." She actually laughed. "This isn't funny." "I agree." Silence. Edward slid a folder across the desk. Inside were hospital records. Her father's diagnosis. Medical expenses. Bank statements. Mortgage papers. Every private detail of her life. Emma's face turned pale. How do you have these? I make it my business to know who I trust. You investigated me? I protected my family. She slammed the folder shut. I think I should leave. Edward didn't stop her. Instead, he quietly spoke. $3 million. She froze. Paid immediately. Her breathing became uneven. In exchange, he looked directly into her eyes. You marry my grandson. Emma turned slowly. No. Edward nodded as though expecting the answer. I understand. She took another step. The offer expires tomorrow. She stopped again. Your father has less than a week before treatment becomes impossible. His words struck harder than any slap. Emma's hands trembled. Why me? Edward looked toward the window. My grandson has refused every arranged marriage. So, but, he smiled faintly. He personally selected you. Emma stared. I've never met him. Edward didn't answer. Instead, he rang a small bell. The study doors opened. A tall man entered. Perfectly tailored black suit. Dark sunglasses. White cane. He moved carefully but confidently. His face was calm. Expression unreadable. Without looking toward anyone, he spoke. Grandfather. Edward nodded. Alexander. Emma's breath caught. This was him. The billionaire. The man the world admired. The man she was expected to marry. Alexander turned slightly. His empty gaze faced the wrong direction. He truly couldn't see. Edward stood. I'll leave you both alone. The door closed. Silence settled over the room. Emma didn't know what to say. Alexander broke it first. I know you don't want to be here. His voice was unexpectedly gentle. I'm sorry. She frowned. Sorry. For forcing you into this. His honesty caught her off guard. I can leave, she said quietly. Yes. He nodded. You can. Another silence. Then he added, but your father cannot leave the hospital. Emma's eyes filled again. Alexander lowered his head. I hate that my family uses money this way. So why agree to it? He smiled sadly. Because sometimes. He touched the handle of his cane. People without choices understand each other better than anyone else. Emma looked at him for a long time. He sounded nothing like the arrogant billionaire she expected. He sounded lonely. Emma prepared to leave. Alexander quietly asked one unexpected question. Before you decide, may I ask you a favor? Emma paused with her hand on the door. What favor? Alexander remained standing beside the window, his white cane resting lightly against his leg. I'd like to take a walk. She frowned. With me? Yes. You don't even know me. A faint smile crossed his face. Neither do you. There was something unusual about him. He didn't speak like a billionaire trying to buy a wife. He spoke like someone trying to borrow a moment of normal life. After a long pause, Emma nodded. Okay. Minutes later, they stepped into the mansion's vast garden. The rain had stopped, leaving the roses sparkling with tiny droplets. Alexander didn't ask for anyone to guide him. Instead, he extended his arm, not to lead her, but to let her choose. Emma hesitated, then gently took it. His posture relaxed almost immediately. You've done this before? She asked. Walk with strangers? A soft chuckle escaped him. No. Trust someone after 5 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. Not often. They followed the stone path in silence. Birds sang from the old oak trees. A fountain murmured nearby. For the first time in weeks, Emma wasn't thinking about hospital bills. She was thinking about the man beside her. Alexander stopped suddenly. There's a bench ahead, isn't there? She looked up. Yes. I remember counting my steps. He smiled. Old habits. They sat. After another long silence, Alexander asked quietly, what do you miss most? Emma wasn't prepared for the question. My mother. He nodded. I miss my sight. She turned toward him. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He said it as simply as someone mentioning the weather. I lost it 6 years ago, he continued. The world became smaller overnight. Emma didn't know what to say, so I learned something. What? People show you who they really are when they think you can't see them. His words lingered in the air. Before Emma could respond, a housekeeper hurried across the lawn. Mr. Blackwood. She sounded frightened. Alexander immediately stood. What happened? The board members are here. He sighed. So early. The housekeeper glanced nervously at Emma. They weren't expecting company. Alexander's expression didn't change. They'll survive. But as they headed back toward the mansion, Emma noticed something strange. Several executives standing near the entrance looked at Alexander with something she couldn't understand. It wasn't respect. It wasn't pity. It looked more like fear, and one of them whispered under his breath, "He still doesn't know?" Emma wasn't sure what that meant, but somehow, she felt that everyone in this mansion was hiding something. Emma pretended not to hear the whispered words. He still doesn't know? But they echoed in her mind as Harrison led her back inside the mansion. The grand hallway suddenly felt colder. The men waiting near the conference room wore $1,000 suits, yet none of them looked comfortable. One adjusted his tie. Another avoided Alexander's face. A third forced a smile that disappeared the moment Alexander turned away. Alexander calmly tapped his cane against the marble floor. "Good morning, gentlemen." Several voices answered at once. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." The respect sounded rehearsed. Edward Blackwood stepped out from another hallway. "The meeting is ready." Alexander nodded. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned toward Emma. "I apologize." "For what?" "I invited you here, then abandoned you." "You didn't." "I did." His lips curved into a small smile. "I don't like making promises I can't keep." Emma found herself smiling back. "It was only a walk." "It wasn't only anything." His answer caught her off guard. "It was the first peaceful conversation I've had in months." Before she could reply, Harrison approached. "Miss Carter, if you'll follow me, lunch has been prepared." Emma looked once more at Alexander. He slightly inclined his head, almost as if he could feel her gaze. "I hope," he said quietly, "that today won't be the last time we talk." Then he disappeared into the conference room. The massive doors closed behind him. Almost instantly, the smiles vanished from the executives' faces. Emma noticed one older man mutter under his breath, "If he signs today, we're finished." Another answered nervously, "Relax. He can't see what's happening." Emma's heartbeat quickened. What exactly couldn't Alexander see? Emma had come here expecting a marriage proposal. Instead, she was beginning to suspect someone was stealing from one of the richest men in the world. Lunch was served in a dining room larger than Emma's entire apartment. Crystal glasses reflected the afternoon sunlight. Fresh flowers filled the room with the scent of lavender. But Emma barely touched the food. Her thoughts stayed inside the conference room. Harrison noticed. "Not hungry. I'm just thinking. That can be dangerous." She smiled politely. "You've worked for this family a long time?" 34 years. "You knew Alexander as a child?" "I practically watched him grow up." Emma hesitated. "He doesn't seem..." She searched for the right word. "Like the man the newspapers describe." Harrison gave a knowing smile. "The newspapers know his wealth. They don't know the man." Before Emma could ask another question, a loud crash echoed through the mansion. Glass shattered. Someone shouted. Emma instinctively stood. "What happened?" Harrison remained strangely calm. "The board meeting." "What?" "They've reached the financial reports." Emma frowned. "People break glasses during financial reports." "Sometimes." His expression darkened. "When they're afraid." Emma quietly followed the sound. She stopped outside the partially open conference room. Voices exploded inside. "We've already explained the losses. We need another quarter." The market changed. Alexander's calm voice cut through the chaos. "No." Silence. "You've blamed the market for 3 years." Another executive spoke. "You don't understand the numbers." Alexander slowly stood. "I understand numbers." He placed both hands on the polished table. "I simply don't understand lies." Emma felt chills. How could a blind man command a room full of powerful executives so effortlessly? Another voice snapped. "You've become paranoid." Alexander smiled. "No. I've become patient." Silence stretched. Then he spoke one sentence that made every executive freeze. "The forensic audit arrives tomorrow." No one breathed. Alexander turned his head slightly. "And if even $1 has been stolen." His voice remained calm. "I'll personally make sure the guilty never work in this industry again." Emma noticed something astonishing. He wasn't looking at anyone. Yet every guilty face in the room turned pale. Someone inside that room wanted Alexander to stay blind. For far more than medical reasons, that evening, Emma prepared to leave. She had already decided. She couldn't marry a stranger. No amount of money justified that. As Harrison escorted her toward the front entrance, Alexander's voice echoed behind them. "Emma." She turned. He stood alone near the staircase. No cane this time. One hand lightly touched the wooden railing. "Would you give me 5 minutes?" Harrison quietly disappeared. Emma walked toward Alexander. "I've made my decision." "I know." "You do?" "You were walking faster." She blinked. "What?" "When people decide to leave, they usually hurry." Emma couldn't help smiling. You notice everything. I have to. Silence settled between them. Finally, Alexander spoke. I won't ask you to marry me. Emma looked surprised. I won't ask anyone to sacrifice their happiness. She frowned. Then why did your grandfather? My grandfather loves me. He also believes money solves every problem. He looked down. It doesn't. The honesty in his voice felt painfully genuine. Emma quietly asked, then why did you agree? Alexander answered without hesitation. Because I was curious. About what? About the woman who spent every paycheck saving someone else's life. Emma froze. You investigated me too. Only enough to know your father isn't the only patient you've helped. She stared. He continued. You volunteer every Saturday. You buy groceries for your elderly neighbor. You paid for a little girl's school uniform last winter. Emma felt embarrassed. Those weren't important. They were to them. He smiled softly. My grandfather looked for a suitable wife. I asked him to find someone kind. The words settled deep inside Emma's heart. Not beautiful. Not wealthy. Kind. Alexander slowly reached into his jacket. He removed a small velvet box. Emma's breathing stopped. He knelt. The movement startled her. Alexander. He opened the box. Inside rested a simple platinum ring. Elegant. Timeless. Not oversized. Not flashy. Perfectly understated. I can't promise romance. I can't promise you'll love me. I can't even promise I'll always know when you're smiling. A tiny laugh escaped Emma. But I can promise this. If you ever become my wife, you'll never wonder whether you're respected. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't want to buy your love. I only want the chance to earn your trust. The mansion fell completely silent. Even the servants had stopped moving. Emma looked at the ring. Then she remembered her father's face. The hospital room. The unpaid bills. The impossible choice. She whispered, if I say yes, my father receives treatment tonight. Alexander answered immediately. Before the ceremony, she closed her eyes. One tear rolled down her cheek. When she finally spoke, her voice barely existed. Yes. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, a woman watching from the second-floor balcony quietly crushed a champagne glass in her hand and whispered, she has no idea what she's just married into. The engagement spread through the mansion in minutes. Servants smiled. Edward seemed relieved for the first time all day. Lawyers hurried through the halls carrying documents. Only one person looked furious. The woman from the balcony. She wore a crimson evening dress that matched the lipstick hiding her clenched jaw. She descended the staircase with perfect elegance. Every step was controlled. Every smile carefully rehearsed. Edward noticed her first. Victoria. She kissed his cheek politely. Grandfather. Emma frowned. Grandfather? Edward introduced them. Emma, this is my granddaughter. Victoria Blackwood. Alexander's cousin. Victoria smiled warmly. At least on the surface. So, she examined Emma from head to toe. You're the woman everyone suddenly loves. Emma extended her hand. It's nice to meet you. Victoria looked at it for 2 long seconds before shaking it. The pleasure is unexpected. Alexander turned toward Victoria. Cousin, congratulations. She kissed his cheek. I hope you finally found happiness. The words sounded kind. But Emma noticed something strange. Victoria's eyes never smiled. Instead, they lingered on the engagement ring. Calculating. Almost frightened. As dinner began, Emma watched Victoria carefully. Whenever Alexander spoke, Victoria watched him. Whenever Edward spoke about the upcoming wedding, Victoria quietly clenched her wine glass. And when Harrison mentioned tomorrow's forensic audit, Victoria nearly dropped her fork. Emma caught it. Only for a split second. But she caught it. Someone at this table knew more than they admitted. The question was, who and why? Outside, lightning flashed across the night sky. Far beyond the mansion gates, a black SUV had been parked for nearly an hour. Inside sat 2 men. One lowered a pair of binoculars. She's inside. The other smiled coldly. Good. Everything is happening exactly as planned. 3 days later, the cathedral overflowed with cameras. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters crowded behind velvet barriers, shouting questions no one answered. The blind billionaire is finally getting married. Who is Emma Carter? Did she marry him for love? Or his fortune? Inside the cathedral, Emma stood before the stained glass windows, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back. The gown was breathtaking. Hand-stitched silk, pearl embroidery, a veil that shimmered like morning mist. but none of it felt like hers. It felt borrowed, like the life she was about to enter. A bridesmaid adjusted her veil. "You look beautiful." Emma forced a smile. "I feel terrified." Before anyone could respond, Harrison entered quietly. "Miss Carter." He held out his phone. "It's the hospital." Emma answered immediately. "Hello." A cheerful voice greeted her. "Miss Carter, this is Dr. Wilson." Her heart pounded. "Is my father?" "He's receiving the treatment." She covered her mouth. The transfer arrived before sunrise. Tears spilled down her cheeks. The medication has already been administered. For the first time in months, Emma cried from relief instead of fear. "Thank you." After hanging up, she looked toward the cathedral doors. Alexander had kept his promise. Not after the wedding. Not after signing papers. Before. Without asking for anything first. Something inside her shifted. Just a little. The ceremony hadn't even begun. Yet Emma was already questioning whether she'd judged Alexander too quickly. The music began. The cathedral doors slowly opened. Hundreds of guests stood. Emma took her first step. Then another. The aisle felt impossibly long. At the altar, Alexander waited calmly beside Edward. His white cane rested neatly against the podium. His expression was peaceful. He couldn't see the hundreds of eyes watching him. He couldn't see Emma walking toward him. Yet when she reached the halfway point, a gentle smile appeared on his face. She frowned. How did he know she was close? Later, she would discover. He had recognized the soft rhythm of her footsteps. Emma finally reached the altar. The priest smiled warmly. "We gather today." The words blurred together. Emma's attention stayed on Alexander. His hands were steady, his breathing slow. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't pretending. He simply seemed grateful. When the priest asked, "Do you, Alexander Blackwood, take Emma Carter to be your wife?" Alexander answered without hesitation. "I do." His voice carried through the cathedral. Then came Emma's turn. Every camera zoomed in. Every guest leaned forward. Even Victoria watched intensely. Emma looked into Alexander's unseeing eyes. She remembered. Her father's treatment. The garden. His apology. His kindness. The promise he'd kept before she ever said yes. She whispered, "I do." The priest smiled. "By the authority entrusted to me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." A gentle silence filled the cathedral. Alexander hesitated, then quietly asked, "Emma, may I?" She understood. He wasn't asking permission because he was uncertain. He was asking because he respected her choice. Emma smiled softly. "Yes." Alexander carefully reached forward. Instead of pulling her toward him, he lightly touched her cheek first, as though making sure she was truly there. Then, he kissed her forehead, not her lips. The entire cathedral fell silent. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't passionate. It was something far rarer. Respect. Emma felt tears fill her eyes again. For reasons she couldn't explain. High above the cathedral, one sniper quietly lowered his rifle. Into a hidden radio, he whispered, "The wedding is complete." The Blackwood estate buzzed with celebration. Champagne flowed. A famous orchestra performed. Politicians, celebrities, and business leaders filled the ballroom. Emma felt like an outsider in every conversation. She smiled politely, answered questions, accepted congratulations. But she noticed something strange. Alexander wasn't interested in the party. He spent most of the evening speaking with waiters, kitchen staff, security guards, gardeners. He remembered everyone's names. He asked about their families. He noticed when one elderly employee limped. "Your knee again?" The man smiled sheepishly. "It's getting old, sir." "So am I." Alexander laughed. "See Dr. Matthews tomorrow. I've already arranged it." Emma stared. The employee's eyes watered. "Thank you, sir." Alexander simply nodded, as if kindness required no applause. Emma quietly asked Harrison, "Does he always do that?" Harrison smiled proudly. "Every employee has medical insurance, scholarships for their children, retirement pensions, emergency funds." Emma blinked. "All because of Alexander?" Harrison nodded. "He created those programs after he lost his eyesight." Emma looked across the ballroom. Alexander stood alone now, listening to the orchestra. He looked peaceful, almost lonely. Later that night, the newlyweds finally reached the master suite. The room overlooked the moonlit gardens. A fire crackled gently. Emma suddenly felt awkward. They were strangers. Married strangers. Alexander sensed her discomfort immediately. "The bedroom has two doors." She looked confused. The second one leads to another suite. I had it prepared. You don't have to share a room with me. Emma stared. You expected me to leave? I expected you to feel safe. He smiled. I promised respect. I meant it. He gently placed a small wooden box on the table. For you. Emma opened it. Inside, she found not diamonds, not jewelry, not expensive gifts. Instead, there was a worn photograph. Her parents, taken 20 years earlier, perfectly restored. Beneath it lay another envelope. She opened it carefully. It contained every document proving her family's house had been bought back. The mortgage was gone. Completely. She looked up in shock. Alexander, you never have to worry about losing your childhood home again. She couldn't speak. My mother planted those roses, she whispered. I know. How? I read your volunteer application. You wrote that your happiest childhood memory was helping her in the garden. Emma's hands trembled. No one had ever remembered such a small detail. No one. Without realizing it, she smiled. A genuine one. Alexander turned toward her. I was hoping you'd smile. She froze. How did you know? You stopped breathing for a second. She laughed. A real laugh. Alexander smiled too. Neither noticed. Someone standing outside the bedroom window. Watching. Recording everything. The mysterious figure quietly sent one text message. Phase 1 successful. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Blackwood Holdings had completely changed. No one laughed. No one chatted. The forensic auditors had arrived. Dozens of accountants carried sealed boxes into the executive conference room. Alexander entered last. His cane tapped softly against the polished floor. Edward stood beside him. Victoria sat silently at the far end of the table. Emma had been invited only as an observer. She sat quietly near the back. The lead auditor spoke first. Mr. Blackwood, our investigation uncovered extensive financial manipulation. Several executives visibly stiffened. Millions of dollars had disappeared. Then tens of millions. Then hundreds. Emma's eyes widened. The room became impossibly still. The auditor continued. These transactions required executive authorization. Alexander calmly folded his hands. I expected that. One executive suddenly stood. This report is incomplete. Another slammed his fist onto the table. We're being framed. Alexander spoke only one sentence. Sit down. The room obeyed. His voice never rose. Yet it carried absolute authority. The auditor placed one final file on the table. There is one more finding. Edward frowned. What is it? The auditor hesitated. The person responsible had unrestricted access to the Blackwood family accounts. Emma looked toward Victoria. Victoria looked toward the window. The auditor slowly opened the file. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to stop. Then, a loud explosion shattered the silence. Boom. The entire building shook violently. Glass burst inward. Smoke filled the conference room. People screamed. The lights went out. Emma was thrown to the floor. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard Alexander shout only one word. Emma. And then, a second explosion rocked the building. Smoke swallowed the conference room. The elegant mahogany table splintered in half. Glass rained from the ceiling. Emergency alarms screamed through the building. Emma struggled to breathe. Her ears rang so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Someone was shouting. Someone else was crying. Then, Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. Emma. She coughed violently. I'm here. Before she could stand, another section of the ceiling collapsed. A steel light fixture crashed exactly where she had been seconds earlier. Strong arms suddenly pulled her backward. She fell against someone's chest. Alexander. She froze. How had he found her? He tightened his grip around her shoulders. Are you hurt? No. What about your head? I'm okay. He gently touched her forehead with trembling fingers, checking for blood. Only after he was certain she wasn't injured did he release the breath he'd been holding. Behind them, another explosion echoed somewhere below. The building shook again. Sprinklers burst to life. Water poured from the ceiling. Smoke mixed with steam, making it almost impossible to see. Security guards rushed into the room. This way, everyone evacuate. Employees pushed toward the emergency exits. Panic spread like wildfire. Emma instinctively grabbed Alexander's hand. This way, instead of moving. Alexander stood perfectly still, listening. His expression suddenly changed. No. Emma stared. What? There are still people inside. A guard shouted. Mr. Blackwood, we have to go. Alexander shook his head. The accounting department. They're trapped. The guard looked confused. How do you know? I heard them. Everyone fell silent. Over the alarms. Over the sprinklers. Over the screams. Alexander had heard faint pounding from behind a collapsed hallway. Without another word, he pulled away from Emma. Alexander. He was already moving. His cane tapped rapidly across the flooded floor, straight toward the smoke. Emma had married a billionaire. But for the first time, she realized she had married a man willing to risk his own life for strangers. The hallway was barely visible beneath the smoke. Security officers covered their mouths with jackets. Nobody goes in, one shouted. The structure isn't stable. Alexander ignored him. He counted every step. Left. Right. Another 10. Then he stopped. There. A guard frowned. Where? Alexander pointed. Behind that wall. Rescue workers hurried over. They began pulling broken beams aside. Seconds later, a frightened voice cried out. Help! The guards looked at Alexander in disbelief. There really was someone behind the rubble. Then another voice. And another. Within minutes, 4 employees were pulled to safety. One young accountant clung to Alexander's arm, sobbing uncontrollably. I thought I was going to die. Alexander smiled gently. You didn't. The young man looked confused. How did you know we were there? Alexander hesitated. I heard your watch. My watch. It ticks louder when you're nervous. The accountant stared. Emma stared too. That wasn't normal hearing. It was extraordinary. Outside, fire trucks surrounded the headquarters. Television cameras broadcast live. Reporters shouted questions. The explosion appears deliberate. Were the Blackwoods targeted? Is this corporate terrorism? Police quickly formed a perimeter. Paramedics examined the injured. Emma sat wrapped in a blanket. She watched Alexander moving from one employee to another. He checked on everyone before allowing anyone to examine him. Only when the last injured worker had been treated did he finally sit down. A paramedic approached. Sir, you've been cut. Alexander touched his forehead. His fingertips came away bloody. He smiled faintly. I didn't notice. Emma felt something tighten inside her chest. Who forgets their own injuries while making sure everyone else survives? Across the street, a man inside a parked sedan lowered his camera, then quietly smiled. He's exactly who they feared. Late that evening, Emma finally returned to the hospital. Her father looked noticeably stronger. Color had returned to his face. When he saw her, he smiled. My beautiful bride. Emma laughed through exhausted tears. You already heard? The nurses watched the wedding. He squeezed her hand. They said you married a billionaire. I married a man. David studied her carefully. And she hesitated. I don't understand him. Her father smiled knowingly. The best people usually take time. Emma sat beside him. He paid for your treatment before I became his wife. He restored our house. He rescued his employees. He apologized for forcing me into this marriage. She looked down. I keep waiting to discover the selfish part. David chuckled softly. You sound disappointed. Emma smiled despite herself. She searched for the words. I don't know why someone like him chose someone like me. David became quiet. Maybe. He squeezed her hand again. Because kindness recognizes kindness. Those words stayed with Emma long after she left the hospital. Back at the mansion, Alexander was about to discover that someone had entered his private study. The mansion was unusually quiet. Most of the staff had gone home after the terrifying day. Alexander slowly walked into his study. He stopped immediately. Something was wrong. He inhaled slowly, then frowned. Harrison. The old butler appeared almost instantly. Yes, sir. Someone has been here. Harrison looked around. Nothing seems disturbed. Alexander shook his head. The cedar oil. Harrison blinked. What about it? The bottle is open. He walked toward his desk. His fingertips brushed across the polished wood. Then, they stopped. The drawer. Harrison hurried over. It's unlocked. Alexander nodded. I always lock it. Emma entered just in time to hear the conversation. What was inside? Alexander remained silent. For several long seconds. He didn't answer. Finally, my mother's journal. Emma frowned. Was it stolen? Alexander slowly opened the drawer. The journal was still there. But something else wasn't. A small flash drive. His expression hardened for the first time since she'd met him. They found it. Emma looked confused. What was on it? Alexander closed the drawer. Proof. Proof of what? Before he could answer, the lights suddenly went out. The entire mansion fell into darkness. Every security alarm activated at once. Outside, dogs began barking. Someone had breached the estate. Deep inside the darkness, a masked intruder quietly whispered into a radio. "I'm in." Security guards raced across the grounds. Flashlights swept through the gardens. Rain began falling again, soaking the ancient rose bushes. Inside the mansion, Emma's heart pounded. She instinctively reached for Alexander. He calmly took her hand. "Stay behind me." She almost laughed. "Alexander, you can't see." "No," he answered quietly. "But I know this house." His confidence surprised her. He counted silently as they moved. 7 steps. "Turn left." "For more?" He suddenly stopped. Emma nearly bumped into him. "What is it?" He tilted his head. His face became completely still. Someone else was breathing. Not Harrison. Not a guard. Someone unfamiliar. Very close. Alexander whispered, "Don't move." The hallway fell silent. Then, a shadow darted from behind a marble column. The masked intruder lunged toward Alexander with a metal baton. "Alexander!" Emma screamed. Alexander reacted instantly. He stepped sideways at the last possible moment. The baton smashed into the wall instead. The attacker stumbled. Alexander grabbed the man's wrist with astonishing precision. Twisted, the weapon clattered onto the floor. Emma stared in disbelief. The intruder broke free and sprinted toward the study. "No!" Alexander shouted. He chased after the footsteps with incredible speed. The masked man reached the study first. He ripped open the desk drawer. Empty. He cursed under his breath. Too late. Alexander had already moved the evidence. Realizing he had failed, the intruder threw a smoke grenade onto the floor. The room filled with thick, gray smoke. By the time security rushed in, the attacker had vanished. Only one thing remained. A black envelope lying on the desk. Emma carefully picked it up. There was no address. No signature. Only 7 words written in silver ink. "Ask him how he really became blind." The room went deathly silent. Emma slowly turned toward Alexander. He hadn't moved. His face had lost all color. For the first time since she'd met him. He looked afraid. The envelope lay on the desk between them. 7 words. Ask him how he really became blind. The study was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Emma looked from the note to Alexander. He stood motionless. His hands, usually steady, were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Harrison entered with 2 security guards. The intruder escaped. No one answered. Harrison noticed the envelope. His face drained of color. "Who found that?" Emma held it up. "It was left here." Harrison slowly read the words. For a brief second, his expression betrayed something. Recognition. Fear. Then it disappeared. "We should burn it." Emma looked at him. "Burn it. It's nothing more than an attempt to divide this family." Alexander finally spoke. "No." Everyone turned toward him. "Leave it." His voice was calm again. "But, sir." "I said leave it." Harrison lowered his head. "Yes, sir." Emma wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, Alexander quietly said, "It's late. You should rest." She nodded, but as she left the study, she realized something. He hadn't denied the message. For the first time since the wedding, Emma wondered whether she had married a man whose greatest pain had never been told. Unable to sleep, Emma wandered through the mansion. The enormous halls felt strangely lonely at night. She eventually found herself outside a room she had never noticed before. The door was slightly open. Inside, moonlight spilled across shelves filled with books. Family photographs lined the walls. At the center of the room stood a beautiful grand piano. Emma stepped inside. It wasn't a study. It wasn't an office. It felt lived in. A gentle voice startled her. "My daughter loved this room." Emma turned. Edward Blackwood stood in the doorway. "I'm sorry," Emma said. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't." He slowly walked toward the piano. "This was my daughter Sophia's music room." Emma remembered the name. Alexander's mother. She gently touched the piano keys. She played. Edward smiled sadly. Every evening. His smile faded. And every evening, Alexander sat beside her. He was only 12. Emma imagined a little boy listening to his mother play while sunlight poured through these same windows. What happened to her? Edward's eyes filled with regret. "A car accident." Emma whispered. "I'm sorry." Edward nodded. He never truly recovered. There was a long silence. Then Emma quietly asked, "Did he lose his eyesight in the same accident?" Edward looked away. For several seconds, he didn't answer. Finally, no. His answer surprised her. It happened years later. What happened? Edward's shoulders stiffened. That story belongs to Alexander. Before Emma could ask another question, Edward gently closed the piano. When he's ready, he'll tell you. Then he walked away, leaving Emma alone with even more questions than before, hidden beneath the piano bench. Emma noticed the corner of an old photograph. Emma slowly knelt. She pulled the photograph free. Dust covered its edges. It had clearly been hidden for years. She brushed it clean. Her breath caught. The picture showed a teenage Alexander, smiling, laughing, standing beside another boy. Both wore racing helmets. Behind them stood two motorcycles. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Brothers forever, A and N." N. Emma whispered. Alexander had never mentioned a brother, or even a close friend. As she turned the picture over again, a voice came from behind her. "You shouldn't be looking at that." Emma jumped. Victoria stood in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable. "I found it." Victoria slowly walked closer. "He used to keep that picture in his wallet." "What happened to the other boy?" Victoria stared at the photograph. "He disappeared." "What do you mean?" "No one has seen him in 6 years." Emma frowned. "Who was he?" Victoria smiled faintly. "The only person Alexander ever trusted more than family." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, if Alexander tells you he became blind in an accident." She looked directly into Emma's eyes. "Don't believe everything you hear." Victoria walked away. Emma stood frozen. Someone in this family was lying. The question was, who? The following morning, Emma decided she needed fresh air. Ignoring the bodyguards, she slipped out through the estate's side gate. A few streets away, she found a tiny flower shop. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, greeted every customer with a warm smile. Emma bought white lilies for her father's hospital room. "You've been crying," Mrs. Brooks said gently. Emma laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" The eyes always tell the truth. As Mrs. Brooks wrapped the flowers, the shop door opened. Alexander stepped inside. Emma stared. "How did you find me?" He smiled. "You forgot your phone." He held it up. "And Harrison guessed where you'd go." Mrs. Brooks gasped. "Alexander." He smiled warmly. "Hello, Mrs. Brooks." The old woman hurried around the counter and hugged him tightly. "You've become too busy to visit." "I deserve that." She lightly slapped his arm. "You certainly do." Emma watched in amazement. Alexander looked completely different here. Relaxed. Comfortable. Almost ordinary. Mrs. Brooks disappeared into the back room and returned carrying a small wooden box. "I've been saving these." Alexander gently opened it. Inside were dozens of handwritten thank you letters. Emma looked confused. Mrs. Brooks smiled. "He paid for my husband's heart surgery." Alexander immediately shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was the foundation." Mrs. Brooks ignored him. "When my husband died, I couldn't afford this shop." She looked around proudly. "He bought the building, but he never put his name on it." Emma slowly looked toward Alexander. "How many people know you've done things like this?" He shrugged. "It doesn't matter." Mrs. Brooks smiled knowingly. "It matters more than you think." Outside the flower shop, a black SUV quietly pulled away. Someone had been photographing them again, that night, far from the Blackwood estate. Inside an abandoned warehouse, the mysterious photographer entered a dimly lit office. He placed several photographs on a desk. Emma laughing, Alexander smiling. The flower shop, the wedding, the explosion. A man sitting in the shadows examined each picture carefully. His face remained hidden. Finally, he spoke. "So, they're beginning to trust each other." The photographer nodded. "Yes." The man leaned back. "That makes the next step even more painful." He reached into a drawer, taking out another photograph. It was old, faded, a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Young racing star dies after highway crash." The photograph beneath the headline showed the same smiling teenage boy from Emma's hidden picture. The caption read, "Nathan Reed, 19. The audience now knew something Emma did not. Nathan wasn't missing. Nathan had been declared dead. The shadowed man smiled coldly. "But dead men," he whispered, "can still destroy lives." The viewers now knew a secret that Emma didn't. Nathan's death was connected to Alexander's blindness. But the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. The following morning, rain tapped gently against the windows of the Blackwood estate. Emma sat alone in the library. She couldn't stop thinking about Nathan Reed. The hidden photograph. Victoria's warning. The anonymous message. Every answer seemed to create two more questions. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Harrison entered carrying a stack of morning mail. These arrived for you. Emma frowned. For me? Yes. She flipped through invitations and charity requests. Then one plain brown envelope caught her attention. No return address. Only 3 handwritten words. For Emma alone. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened it. Inside was a single folded letter, along with an old silver key. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. Emma, if you're reading this, then Alexander still hasn't told you the truth. Ask yourself one question. Why would a man who lost everything refuse the surgery that could restore his sight? If you truly want answers, go to Blackwood Lake. Cabin 7. Come alone. There was no signature. Emma stared at the letter. Refuse the surgery? Alexander had never mentioned any surgery. Someone knew Alexander's deepest secret, and they wanted Emma to discover it before he could tell her himself. That afternoon, Alexander returned from a board meeting. He immediately sensed something was wrong. Emma wasn't humming. She wasn't in the garden. The house felt empty. Where's Emma? Harrison hesitated. She went out. With security? No. Alexander's expression hardened. Where? We don't know. His hand tightened around his cane. For the first time, real fear crossed his face. Meanwhile, Emma drove toward Blackwood Lake. The road narrowed into thick pine forest. Mist floated across the water. Everything felt strangely quiet. Cabin 7 stood alone near the shore. Old, weathered, almost abandoned. The silver key fit perfectly. The door creaked open. Inside, dust covered every surface. Sunlight filtered through broken windows. There was only one piece of furniture. A wooden table. On it rested a cassette recorder. And another envelope. Emma pressed play. Static filled the room. Then, a man's voice. Young. Laughing. Alexander. Nathan, slow down. You're going to kill us both. Another voice laughed. You're the one who wanted to race. The tape skipped. Then tires screeched. Someone screamed. Glass shattered. Silence. Emma's hands trembled. The recording continued. A weak voice whispered. Alex, don't tell anyone. The tape ended. Behind Emma. The cabin door slowly closed. Someone else was inside. Emma turned sharply. A man stepped out of the shadows. Tall. Bearded. A scar stretched across the left side of his face. His eyes looked tired, but unmistakably familiar. She recognized him immediately. From the photograph. Nathan. He gave a bitter smile. So, you've seen my picture. Emma couldn't speak. They said, you were dead. Nathan laughed quietly. They wanted the world to believe that. Who? The people who stole Blackwood Holdings. Emma stared. What are you talking about? Nathan slowly sat down. 6 years ago, Alexander and I discovered something. We found evidence that several executives, including members of his own family, were stealing billions from the company. Emma felt her pulse racing. The accident. Nathan nodded. It wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt. He looked down at his scar. They thought we both died. Emma whispered. But Alexander. Nathan closed his eyes. He shielded me. The explosion destroyed his eyesight. And everyone believed it was just a tragic crash. Emma struggled to breathe. So why didn't he tell anyone? Nathan looked directly at her. Because if the people behind it knew I survived, they'd finish the job. Emma suddenly understood. Alexander hadn't been hiding the truth to protect himself. He'd been protecting Nathan. For 6 years, outside the cabin, several black SUVs surrounded the building. Nathan looked through the window. They found us. His face turned pale. They're here. Men in tactical gear rushed from the vehicles. Windows shattered. Someone shouted, take the witness alive. Nathan grabbed Emma's hand. We have to go. They escaped through the back door into the forest. Branches whipped against their faces. Rain soaked the ground. Footsteps thundered behind them. Emma stumbled. Nathan pulled her up. Hurry. A gunshot echoed through the trees. Birds exploded into the sky. Another shot. Closer. Then, a familiar voice roared across the forest. Emma. Alexander. He had found them. Despite being blind, he ran through the woods with Harrison and estate security close behind. Nathan stared in disbelief. He actually came. Alexander followed the sounds of the attackers. Every step was guided by instinct. He shouted, Emma, I'm here. Her voice led him. He reached her seconds later. Without hesitation, He placed himself between Emma and the armed men. One attacker laughed. A blind hero? Alexander answered quietly. No, a husband. Just then, police sirens echoed through the valley. The attackers scattered into the woods. Several were captured. Others disappeared into the rain. Nathan slowly emerged from hiding. Alexander smiled before Nathan even spoke. I knew you'd still breathe too loudly. Nathan laughed through tears. You always could hear everything. The two friends embraced for the first time in 6 years. Emma wiped away her tears. The pieces were finally coming together, but one person was still missing. Victoria. And no one knew where she had gone. The next morning, police arrested 3 senior executives. Millions of stolen dollars were recovered. But the investigation uncovered something even worse. Victoria's office was empty. Her passport was gone. Security footage showed her leaving the estate before dawn. Edward looked devastated. My own granddaughter. Hours later, authorities located her at a private airfield. She wasn't alone. She stood beside the chairman of Blackwood Holdings, the same executive who had argued with Alexander during the audit. He smiled coldly. You should have stayed blind. The truth finally emerged. Victoria had never wanted Alexander dead. She wanted him powerless. As long as he remained dependent on others, she could continue helping steal from the company. Nathan's survival threatened everything. So did Emma. The final confrontation would decide not only the future of Blackwood Holdings, but the future of the Blackwood family itself. The private airfield fell silent. Dark storm clouds gathered overhead. Police cars surrounded the runway. Red and blue lights flashed across the wet concrete. Victoria stood beside Chairman Richard Coleman, her face calm despite the dozens of officers pointing weapons in their direction. Edward Blackwood slowly stepped forward. His shoulders seemed 20 years older. Victoria, his voice trembled. Please, don't make this worse. Victoria smiled sadly. You still think this is about money? Edward stared at her. Isn't it? She laughed. No, it's about being invisible. Everyone watched in silence. Victoria looked toward Alexander. My entire life, I was raised as a Blackwood, but no one ever looked at me. She pointed at Alexander. Everything was always about him. The brilliant heir, the perfect grandson, the miracle child. When he lost his sight, she shook her head. I thought things would finally change. They didn't. People loved him even more. Tears formed in her eyes. I worked twice as hard. I did everything right. And I was still. Second, Edward lowered his head. For the first time, he realized she wasn't entirely wrong. He had overlooked her. Not with cruelty, with neglect. But neglect had grown into resentment. And resentment had become greed. Richard Coleman interrupted. Enough. He grabbed Victoria's arm. We're leaving. He pulled a pistol from inside his coat. The officers raised their weapons. Alexander stepped forward. Richard. The chairman laughed. You can't even see me. Alexander smiled faintly. No, but I can hear you. He tilted his head. You're holding the gun with your left hand. Richard's smile disappeared. Alexander continued. You're standing 3 steps to Victoria's right. Another pause. And you're scared. Richard fired. Bang. Chaos erupted. Everyone dropped to the ground. The bullet narrowly missed Alexander. Before Richard could fire again, Nathan tackled him from behind. The gun slid across the runway. Police rushed in. Within seconds, Richard Coleman was handcuffed. His empire of lies had collapsed. Victoria didn't run. She simply stood there, watching everything. END.AS officers led Richard away. Victoria quietly whispered 5 words that shocked everyone. I wasn't the mastermind. The airfield became eerily quiet. Every eye turned toward Victoria. Edward frowned. What did you say? Victoria looked exhausted. The person behind everything was never Richard. Emma's heartbeat quickened. Then who? Victoria slowly looked at Edward. You trusted him. You promoted him. You treated him like family. Edward's face slowly changed. No. Victoria nodded. Harrison. Silence. Complete silence. Emma couldn't believe it. Harrison? The loyal butler? The man who had served the family for 34 years? Alexander remained perfectly still. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply whispered. I know. Emma turned toward him. You knew? Alexander nodded slowly. For months. Nathan looked stunned. Then why didn't you arrest him? Alexander answered quietly. Because I couldn't prove who he worked for. Emma frowned. What do you mean? Alexander reached into his jacket. He removed another flash drive. The one they stole was a fake. Victoria looked shocked. Alexander smiled. The real evidence never left me. Just then, police radios exploded with urgent chatter. Suspect fleeing the estate. Repeat. Harrison is fleeing. Alexander lowered his head. It ends today. The man everyone trusted had betrayed the family from the very beginning. Hours later, police surrounded an abandoned shipyard. Harrison stood alone at the end of an old dock. His shoulders slumped. His escape was over. Alexander slowly walked toward him. No bodyguards. No police beside him. Just Emma. Rain began falling again. Harrison smiled sadly. I always hoped it wouldn't be you. Alexander stopped a few feet away. Why? 34 years. One word. One question. Why? Harrison closed his eyes. I loved your mother. Emma gasped softly. Harrison looked toward the gray water. She never loved me. So I stayed. I watched. I served. I convinced myself loyalty would someday become enough. His voice broke. It never was. When she died, I blamed your family. Edward slowly approached. Harrison, I treated you like my brother. You treated me like your employee. Harrison answered quietly. There's a difference. Years of pain spilled from him. He admitted everything. He had secretly helped corrupt executives steal from the company. He arranged the attack that caused the explosion 6 years earlier. He believed Alexander had died. When Alexander survived, blind, Harrison chose to stay close, waiting for another opportunity. Emma looked at Alexander. So, the note was true. Alexander nodded. The crash wasn't an accident. She stepped closer. Then why didn't you tell me? Alexander smiled sadly. Because that wasn't my biggest secret. Emma frowned. What was? He took a slow breath. The doctors offered surgery. They said there was a chance. A small one. I refused. Emma stared. Why? Alexander looked toward Nathan. If I regained my sight, everyone would celebrate. But Nathan would still spend every day looking over his shoulder. I couldn't risk exposing him. I chose certainty over hope. Emma felt tears fill her eyes. He had given up the possibility of seeing again to protect his best friend. For 6 years, Nathan quietly wiped away his own tears. You idiot. Alexander laughed softly. I've been called worse. Emma finally understood. The greatest secret Alexander had hidden was never his blindness. It was his sacrifice. 3 months later, spring had returned. The gardens at the Blackwood estate bloomed with thousands of roses. David Carter walked slowly through them. Cancer-free, healthy, smiling. Emma hugged him tightly. You look amazing. I feel amazing. Edward joined them. So does our company. The stolen money had been recovered. Every employee who lost a pension was compensated. Scholarship programs doubled. Alexander's first decision as chairman was simple. No employee will ever choose between medicine and rent again. The board approved it unanimously. Nathan accepted a position leading the company's ethics division. Not because Alexander trusted him, because everyone did. Victoria pleaded guilty in court. But Alexander asked the judge for mercy. She should answer for her crimes, but not be defined by them forever. Even Edward was surprised. After everything she did, Alexander smiled. Someone once showed me mercy. It changed my life. One quiet evening, Emma found Alexander sitting beside the old piano. You've been thinking. He smiled. I always am. She gently took his hand. The doctors called. He nodded. I know. They've improved the procedure. There was silence. Then Emma whispered, I'll support whatever you decide. Alexander smiled. I already decided. And he squeezed her hand. I'm finally ready. 6 months later, Emma sat beside his hospital bed. The surgery lasted nearly 8 hours. Every minute felt endless. Finally, the surgeon entered. It was successful. Emma burst into tears. The bandages stayed on for several days. When they were finally removed, Alexander blinked slowly. The room was blurry. Shapes, colors, light. Then, one face became clear. Emma, the first person he had ever chosen, and the first person he truly saw. She smiled through tears. So, am I what you imagined? Alexander laughed softly. No. Emma's heart dropped. He gently cupped her face. You're even more beautiful. She kissed him. This time, not on the forehead, not as strangers, but as two people who had survived every storm together. A year later, The Blackwood Foundation opened the Sophia Blackwood Hope Center, providing free cancer treatment, vision care, and financial assistance to families who could never afford it. David volunteered there every week. Nathan mentored young entrepreneurs. Edward finally retired, spending his mornings playing chess with neighborhood children. Alexander and Emma often walked through the gardens at sunset, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes in silence. One evening, Emma asked, "If I hadn't needed help from my father, do you think we still would have met?" Alexander smiled. "I don't know." She laughed. "That's not very romantic." He looked into her eyes. "No, it's honest." He took her hand. "But I believe kindness has a way of finding kindness." Emma rested her head on his shoulder. The wind carried the scent of roses through the garden. For the first time in many years, neither of them felt trapped by the past. They were finally free, not because they had escaped pain, but because they had chosen forgiveness over revenge, love over fear, and hope over despair. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't measured in billions of dollars. Sometimes it's measured by the people who stay beside you when they have every reason to walk away. If you enjoyed this story, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories like this.